first time I met the Quarrymen, which is John Lennon's first group.
Okay.
They started in 1956, and I met them. They came and did a concert at Dovedale School, and as you mentioned, that's the school that John Lennon and George Harrison went to, and the school that my three daughters went to. And we're talking with them, they said, we sort of know how the Quarrymen started, but there was this guy whose name was George Lee. I said, and nobody knows what happened to him. He said, but I'm sure he was there at the beginning, but that was it. So that was part of the quest. So interviewed the guys from the Quarrymen. They've become good friends, real nice guys. But after the first book had come out, I got this email, and the subject line was George Lee. I went, ooh. And this guy says, that was my dad.
Oh.
Wow, okay. So I said, is he still around? Yeah. Would he be happy to talk to me? Yeah. So I'm the only person who's interviewed him. So I got in touch. His name's actually Jeff Lee, not George Lee. Now, the reason is, when you're at school, particularly for lads, you get nicknames. So one of the big department stores in Liverpool was George Henry Lee. So because his name was Jeff Lee, initials G Lee, and the store, George Henry Lee, his nickname was George. So this is why it was hard to find him, because everybody's looking for George Lee, and there wasn't a George Lee.
I love how stupid that is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a great story, because once John Lennon was going down to his house, so he knocks on the door, and Jeff's mum answers, and he says, is George there? His mum said, well, nobody called George lives here. Oh, okay. And he cycles off again. Because, of course, they all called him George, but he was actually Jeff.
Right.
So I interviewed Jeff, and I said, what happened? And he said, well, he was in the same class as John, and they were talking about music, as they all were back then. Everybody was talking about music. And he said, well, you're always talking about it, John. Why don't you start a group? And John thinks, you know what, actually, that's a good idea. They become school friends. He starts the Quarrymen. But then the other thing Jeff said was, I've got a guitar. Said, I just can't get round to playing it. Do you want to borrow it? So this became the first guitar that John learned to play on. So these were two facts which nobody knew before. One, who this guy was. And secondly, this was the first guitar John learned to play on. And I went searching, and I found the quote from John. First guitar I learned to play on, I borrowed from a mate at school.